Perfect. Thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, so for those who are just catching the recording, it's fine. We did an intro. We had some trouble recording, but it's fine now. So basically the categories, like I said, gluten-free, which means that no gluten things from wheat flour, rye flour, barley, things like that. A lot of staples. Vegan, so no milk, no butter, no animal products or honey usually. And then we were talking about religious restrictions. So for Jewish, it would be kosher, Muslim would be halal. And also even for, if you're looking historically, you know, there's, well, not historically, modern times, Catholicism has periods of time like Lent, and things just in general. I'm sure there's many more, you know, Hindus are usually vegetarian. So there's lots of reasons to maybe need this. And so once you kind of know what it is that you're trying to address, then you can kind of narrow a search, and you don't have to stick to a specific food period for everything that you make. It can, you know, be helpful depending on what you're trying to avoid, to pick and choose different recipes from different spheres to help accommodate that. Now, like I said, in my journey, I had to accommodate gluten-free. I can't, no eggs, no dairy or butter, things like that. So for me, it was easier to find recipes that were naturally either vegan or gluten-free. And I just kind of want to share, I will share some like resources and things, but I want to share a quick little breakdown, like a super quick replacer basic for those who may not know already for themselves how to do replacements for certain dietary restrictions. So I'm going to quickly pop that open. Okay, cool. So just real quick. So for instance, I hope you guys can see this. For gluten-free, just a normal basic thing is flour. And I would say almond flour and rice flour are super used in medieval era that we're dealing with here, depending on where you go. But almond flour and rice flour, you usually might need a binding agent in addition to that, like a tapioca starch or xanthan gum. In addition to almond and rice flour, you can use sorghum flour, amaranth, things like that. Other things like flaxseed are good binders as well. You can also use pre-made ones. I like the ones from Bob's Red Mill. Easy 1-to-1 for regular wheat flour. There's also vegan like basics here. So for eggs, real quick replacements here that you can use. Flax is a great, because it's naturally a binder, or other starches. Aquafaba, which is the water from chickpeas or other beans, but you just grab a can of chickpeas and strain out the water of it, the liquid, and you can use that for meringues and things like that. It's pretty cool. Milk, you usually, I would say, depending on the region, probably almond or rice milk, but other nut milks probably work too. And instead of butter, coconut oil, vegetable shortening, usually an unsalted pre-made vegan butter. I prefer Earth Balance or Miyokos, depending on your budget, or just regular oil. You can just swap it in there. Honey, a great replacer that's period, probably be sugar. You can do sugar syrup if you need it to be liquid. Molasses or maple syrup, depending on the use that you need it for. And then chicken or meat. A lot of recipes for things that you want to be meatless, you want to look for either a side dish or the peasant, the quote unquote peasant dish, because you know, historically the lower classes, those who did not have as much money to afford meat all the time, they made one, you know, full meals with what they were able to grab, which often wasn't meat. So that lends itself very nicely for those who are vegetarian. So beans, lentils, other hearty mix of vegetables can kind of come together to be very hearty. So kosher and halal, basically this one is kind of just specific to where you buy your ingredients. So basically for kosher, you don't want to mix dairy with meat. I know more about kosher than halal, so I can't give you tons of details, but basically don't mix dairy with meat in the same dish. So you wouldn't want to have like a meat pie with cream, like a chicken pot pie with milk. Don't add the milk, or use almond milk instead. Also, if you were to use meat, just make sure you're buying meat that is labeled either halal or kosher. You can go to a kosher market, you can go to a halal market, just to make sure. And in addition to that, just to make sure that you're finding ease in a recipe that you don't even have to worry about, you can find a kosher halal recipe that's naturally going to fit because it's from a region or an area that it is heavily influenced by that religion. So Middle Eastern foods are probably going to be already halal or kosher, depending. You can find kosher meals if you look up Jewish specific recipes, historical medieval Jewish recipes, things like that. There are resources online. Google is your friend, I will say, and so is YouTube. So I'm going to just kind of come back for a second and stop the screen share. Okay, so yeah, so basically, one of the things I was mentioning before was depending on the purpose of the ingredient. Like I mentioned with the honey, you'd want to use sugar syrup or versus regular sugar if you need it to be a liquid. So that's also a really good segue or like opening point in how to find a recipe that works for you already. What is the purpose of that ingredient? Meaning like if the eggs are to just bind something together, then you don't need the rising agent aspect, which means you don't need to find something that's going to make it fluffy. So you really just need something that's going to hold it together. So like a starch that's going to bind stuff, right? So if you kind of, I mean, it's a little bit sciencey, but we all like the research, right? So get into the idea, learn what makes the recipe work, and like why, and that can really help you be able to replace things. But to make it easy, you could just look up one-to-one replacements in the modern world. They have lists all over the place, but they may not fit the period recipe. But you know, if you're trying to accommodate for a specific need, it's okay. But if you do want to find a period specific recipe, you can focus on a region like I was mentioning about kosher or halal recipes, but even not for the religious specifications. For instance, for me, gluten-free, I know that almond flour is a really good replacement for me. I'm not allergic to nuts, but so I can use that. And I know also through my research that there are a lot of Italian, Mediterranean area recipes that use almond flour naturally as part of their recipes instead of wheat flour. Okay, so these are the places that I tend to look for recipes because I know that the recipe, I'm not going to have to replace anything because it's already going to fit what I want. If you can kind of, if you want to start by like researching based on the restriction in a medieval sense, find the replacement that works for you. So for instance, in my case, I was choosing almond flour instead of wheat flour, and almond flour, find the area where almonds existed naturally. So you know, in Italy, the southern European region, some of the Middle East region as well used almonds and things like this. So, and there you will find replacements easily. In addition, like I mentioned before, even if you're not Catholic, look for Lent recipes if you don't want to eat red meat or anything, because they're going to be using fish. Because for Lent, they don't eat red meat. They're going to use fish instead. So you can find recipes for Lent, medieval recipes for Lent, and they will give you meatless recipes basically. So that's ways to use your SEA historical knowledge and combine that with your need and be able to kind of navigate a little bit easier so you're not having to replace things and have your recipe fail. Sometimes, especially with gluten-free or replacing an egg, the recipe cannot feel authentic or it doesn't work altogether because you're trying to create a replacement based on a recipe that already doesn't have a lot of specifics, right? When you're looking at a recipe from an older time period, they do not provide specifics. So it can be hard to know how to replace. So it can be easier to just find a recipe that already works for you. Like I said, for me, a lot of, especially on the dessert side, finding a recipe that's both gluten-free and dairy-free, egg-free, vegan, basically, can be difficult, but you just kind of want to find those places that might serve that or a time period as well, where, you know, basically they may not have as many overlapping ingredients in the more ancient times versus in the more Renaissance times when they were trading much more fluently with the rest of, between Europe and the North Americas and things like that. So you're getting a lot more different ingredients to be able to be period accurate still, right? Whereas, I mean, perhaps the Romans were traveling around a lot. You can probably get it through that too. But just, if you're doing a Native American recipe from the earlier times, you're probably not going to have, things that weren't over here yet. But yeah, so we have some questions. So I'll take some of that. Let's see. Genevieve asks, do you have a favorite dish or a dish that was your biggest hit with eaters? Yes, I do, my dear. Okay, so I'm going to share that. I actually can go to the website where I found it. So far, my favorite one and that people really like, it's called Krippus. It's Krippus. It's actually English, and it's basically crisps, but it's like funnel cake. And I actually did a replacement for it. This was baked goods and things like that are kind of hard if you want the delicious pies and things like that. But let me go ahead and share that for you. So one of my favorite websites to find recipes is this medieval cuisine recipe index. It's medievalcuisine.com, and it's a little, it's converted to a classic site, so I don't know if they're updating, but it's actually, I think, through somebody who was in the SCA. And what's nice about it is if you go to this upper column here, the tabs, basically go to culinary journey, and then it says recipes by category, recipes by region, recipes by time period. And I like to do recipes by region because that helps me find, like I was talking about before, the different areas. There are Islamic recipes, Italian recipes, Spanish recipes. I know that I'm going to find in all three of those sections dishes that are rice-based or almond-based instead of gluten or milk and things like that. So you can use this as a resource to help navigate how to find what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up that recipe if I can, actually. Hold on one second. But basically, there it is. Krippus. So here on this website, like I said, because it was, I think, created by somebody who was in the SCA, we have the original writings. This is from the Ancient Cookery Cookbook from 1381. And this one's printed from the Forum of Curie, which is actually from 1780. Okay, so this might be, if you've never experienced the recipes before, you might find one where it's written in Old English, especially, or whatever language it's in. And even if you know your language, like let's say it's French, it's medieval French, so it's going to be a little difficult. But if you want to translate, feel free to try. But there's usually some sort of already translation for you or a transliteration, and it's really fun if you find the English one. So this one is my favorite recipe because it was one of my earlier ones, and I found it personally easy to make and easy to replace. So if you look, this is the fun untranslated version, which I love reading out loud. So if you are reading an English recipe or a recipe in a medieval version of a language that you already know, try reading it out loud because it's fun to try to see what they actually mean, and you can kind of hear it a little bit. But basically, it says crisps, but it's basically fried dough. Delicious. How can you go wrong? And it says take flour, whites of eggs, which is a no-go, and it says flour, which is a no-go, but it doesn't specify what kind of flour. So it could be almond flour, you don't know. Whites of eggs, sugar, or honey, which is great. So if you're vegan, you can use sugar instead of honey. Mix together to make a batter. Take lard, which again, feel free to use oil. People fry it in oil and lard, depends. And place in a skillet and cast the batter therein, which means just throw the batter in like funnel cake. You're just putting batter in oil and then making fritters. Okay, so that's my favorite one. The reason it's my favorite, it's super simple, easy for me to replace. I just use my regular flour replacement, Bob's Red Mill. I actually threw in some nutmeg, just some period spice that I knew would help, or cinnamon's fun too. And instead of the whites of the eggs, I use the aquafaba, which is from the chickpea can. It's super fun. It's pretty much just the same amount that you need exactly, which is nice. I like to whip it a little bit just to make it a little frothy, just to help. You can make it stiff, but you don't have to. This is just to help bind it. And you just make a batter. And then you fry some oil, and then you drizzle over honey, which I like doing it with honey. And then I added some pomegranates and things like that. I'm actually going to show you. Ta-da, there it is. So those little pretty little swirls. Depending on the thickness of the batter, if you want to add less water or more water, you can make it thinner. So this one had a little bit more water. You can see that it made thin lines and they fried kind of quickly. So it kept the line shape. If you make the batter thicker, you'll get this, which was my first one where I did it pretty straight to the thing, where I literally took a spoonful and just dropped it in the oil and mixed it in the oil as it said. And that was the thicker version. And I used honey and looks like walnuts on this. That was a hit. Everybody liked it. I use it almost at every event or thing gathering that I'm going to that's for medieval, because it's delicious. It's sweet, it's crunchy, it's a bit chewy. And even people who are not in the SCA and who don't have allergies love it. They don't know. They don't know I did replacements. And here I did it with pomegranate and apple. Because it was the Jewish New Year. So yeah, that is my favorite one. Here, since we're on the pictures page, this was when I was making for, I think it was friendship tourney. We were making pies, and I made a bunch of pies. Well, we were making pies as a group from our lovely little upper crust guild. We were all making them en masse, but we talked as a group. And we divided things up, trying to prepare pies that were like groups of difference. Like, so we had meat pies, we had vegetarian pies, and then a couple of gluten-free pies that I made that were also vegan, to be inclusive for everybody. So the majority were meat and chicken and vegetables, things like that. And then, but we had like a few available, and it was nice because our Baroness at the time was gluten-free. So that worked out. You never know. And this was a saltwater crust, which is, you can't really make gluten-free or vegan very easily. So I just ended up making this kind of a flat one instead, as you can see, and you can still make things pretty. But yeah, so this is part of my intro I was going to do, because you can see how much I love food. That's fun, a giant bowl. And that runs in the family, because that's my brother eating pho out of a giant bowl. So we love food, okay? Restrictions does not mean that you don't eat, okay? It's just trying to navigate that. It's 11:30 right now, so we have about 20 minutes, and there's other things I can talk about on my own, but I want to open it up if there are any questions, either specific ingredient replacements you want to talk about, or region replacements, or just general concerns. I'm open to that. So if you want to even turn on your mic at least, or maybe your camera so I can see some faces too, that's fine. You don't have to turn on your stuff, but if you do have a question, I'd love to kind of have a little chat about it, your experience, if you've engaged with historical cooking with restrictions. I would love to talk about that. If not, I'm sure I could manage to talk longer. I do have some stuff still, but I did want to make sure people could participate and ask. Anybody? If you want to add in the chat, if there's a reason why you're visiting this class, I'd love to know the reason why, if you have restrictions, or if you're just curious about it, or if you are a cook in the SCA and you want to be inclusive. That would be cool to know too. Feel free to add that in chat.
I've been doing historical cooking for far too long now. With people with a variety of dietary restrictions that have come in and out over the last number of years. And the one thing that I've kept in mind that's really helped me a lot is the idea that not everybody has to be able to eat everything, but there should be something there for everybody to eat. And when they're paying in, when they're paying in a decent amount of money, I want to make sure that everybody gets their money's worth, even if not everybody is eating the same dish.
Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate that. Like when you're trying to think about inclusivity, it's not about everybody has to eat everything. It's kind of impossible because, you know, if let's say you make a gluten-free dish to be inclusive and that's also vegan, that's, you know, whatever, but you use almond flour. Now the people who can't have nuts can't eat, right? So that's totally right. It's more about having that option. Now, I will say that as a person who experiences this in general things, not only the SEA, but in general, going to places where someone else is providing the food, a lot of times the idea of the meal that they provide is not a meal. So while it doesn't have to be the same as everybody else's, you want it to still be on par with what it is. So if you're not providing full meals for everybody, this doesn't apply to this.
Exactly.
But if you're saying that you're going to be providing full meals like meat pies and like, you know, all the things, you want to make sure that you have something of equal stature that is at least available to the main things that you could think of, I would say. Like, and again, I wouldn't go hard on this. You're not going to have 50% of the people who need an alternate, right? You don't need to probably do that. If it's up to the developers of the event to know if people need it, that's a level of organizing you could manage. If it's smaller, that's fine. But in general, you don't have to worry about providing equal amounts of each. It's usually the people who have restrictions, there are fewer, as you would probably imagine. But you do want to make sure that you have something. If you're providing a full meal, that's regular, normal, whatever, you want to provide an option of, you know, fewer amount, but of similar stature that it feels like it would be a full meal. Like you're not going to just provide like a side dish for those who are vegan or gluten-free while the rest of the people get a full banquet. If that makes sense, right? So if that's from your perspective, you're trying to be including that person, that's really awesome. And I totally love that you're doing that. And I understand, especially if you don't personally have to deal with this, that it can feel daunting and overwhelming to try to take on an added thing that you've never dealt with before. But that's why this is here, to start your thinking, to consider it also an idea that when you're cooking in period in general and you're researching, you're trying to get into the historical aspect of cooking, there are restrictions because it's not modern. So you're already in the habit, hopefully, of trying to accommodate this idea of people who had access to very specific things in a time period that you're trying to emulate. And so you're in that attitude of, yes, let me try to engage with that scenario and try to be as close to understand and fulfill that brief as much as possible. And it's similar to when you're trying to accommodate in the modern allergy restriction world. It's the same thing. You have a set restriction, but you're trying to like, let's kind of think about that. Let's go into that realm a little bit. And it's a similar restriction idea where they may not have access to the same things, but how do I like make that work? So hopefully hopefully it doesn't feel like a chore. It's really fun actually when you find things that work and you're like, wow, that's period, and it works really well. So yeah. Paula, have you found that experience to be like crazy difficult, or was it kind of fun to find recipes that worked?
I have found that organization will set you free.
Yeah, labeling.
Yes, labeling, to quote Alton Brown. Spreadsheets and lists of everybody's, excuse me, there are a lot of allergens in the air right here. Lists of everybody's allergies and making sure that, you know, you have something so that my gluten-free people can still eat and not kill my nut allergy people.
Right.
That's the biggest challenge, because most of your gluten-free, that's all your flours are almond nut flours, and my nut guy will die.
Can't have it.
Oat flour, oat milk, that has been saving grace. even though I was thrilled when commercial almond milk became available, but then we had the nut allergies. So, but it is a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. I mean, I didn't get into doing this kind of thing because I wanted to, pop the top off of something and throw it in the microwave. But you just gotta sit down and do your planning ahead of time and figure out what you need for everybody, because you want everybody to get fed. You want everybody walking away going, God, that was really good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. And they can be really good. So even the things that are not, even if you do have to do replacements, they can still be delicious and they can still feel like the original. Or if it's a recipe that's naturally fitting the restrictions, obviously that will taste delicious. So yeah, thank you for sharing, Paul. I really appreciate that. I think too, like as a person who's had to deal with this personally, I have dealt with my own issues of trying to ask or speak to people about accommodating me. I have personal things where I don't like asking people to accommodate, but I know that it's really necessary for me to feel included and to feel part of the experience, because to me, food is a huge deal. Like traveling, I'm like, part of the reason why I want to travel is so I can taste the foods of that region, right? Which is a little bit difficult. However, I would encourage you, if you're a little shy or you're not wanting to share or feel like you're putting upon another person to include you, I would maybe encourage you to find somebody within the SDA that you can open up to about it, or can kind of request, or maybe join or become friends with the cooking people in the SDA, so that you feel comfortable to communicate with them about your accommodations or your needs, so that you can start to feel able to be more included, because sometimes people just don't know. And I assume that I have found this to be the case, that most of the people in the SDA want to be very inclusive and want you to participate and want you to have fun. And if they can, they will help you do that. And if you're not a cook, but you want to eat, talk to your guilds, if they have a cooking guild, contact them. If you find the cooks in the kingdom, talk to them, talk to your seneschal, whatever, to get you with the right people. Because it can be fun. It also can be a great way to connect with people. Like, even if you're not the one, because if you have to constantly just make for yourself the whole time, you're losing out on an opportunity to share with other people and to talk. And other people who are interested, who don't have restrictions, are really fascinated a lot of times about, wow, this tastes great. How did you make this? Like they don't understand, but they're interested, So please talk to other people about it. Try to have fun. And you can also try to find like-minded people. We could even, if you want to, we could start like an SEA cooking restriction thing, so we can share replacements and recipes and things like that are more inclusive. That would be fun. We can totally do that. Just because I know it can be daunting when you sit in a room with like everybody who's talking about meat pies all the time, and you're just like, yep, love that idea. Can't, like, for instance, my guild meeting this week, I think it's this month, is having an all cheese. Literally, it's just all cheese. It's all cheese. And I was just like, I love cheese. That sounds delicious. But I know that if I go, I'm going to partake, and my body's going to hurt later. So I'm just like, thank you. Goodbye. I'll see you next month. So normally that's not the case, but sometimes that happens. So I know you're like, shoot, I want to participate too. But yeah, so just, you can always communicate. And, if you've never cooked before and you have restrictions, it's a great time to learn. Okay, any other questions, experiences,
I
comments?
just wanted to say I really appreciate your class and I feel validated. I've been cooking feasts. I don't personally have any food restrictions, but I've been cooking feasts in the SCA for 24 years now. And I've always made a point when we're advertising the feast to make my contact information available and say, if you have concerns or, sensitivities or allergies, please contact me well before so that I can accommodate you. And that has mostly worked out well. We've had a couple issues, not my feast, but a couple places where there was, a spare ticket on the day of the feast. Somebody bought the ticket but hadn't looked at the menu and had serious issues, and then made a stink about not being accommodated, which, that, as far as I can tell, that's only really happened once or twice in the 24 years that I've been cooking feasts. But it's horrifying when you know that somebody's bought a ticket and that they can't eat, but at the same time, they bought the ticket the day of and didn't do any sort of reconnaissance for their own issues.
Right. For sure.
But, you know, even when I haven't had somebody say, you know, I've got these sensitivities, I always make sure that there's something, a full meal for a vegetarian, a full meal for somebody who doesn't eat pork, a full meal for somebody who doesn't eat, you know, the other shellfish is the other big thing. But, you know, when I've had people that have had special needs, I've actually either made the same food without those things, because it's always, you know, as your Lord likes. If your Lord doesn't like something that somebody's allergic to, then you can make something that doesn't have that in it. You can always adapt to the people recipe. You can always just not put that thing in there. And the aquafaba thing is, it's amazing. If anybody who's listening right now, if you haven't done this thing, oh my God, it is magical.
It's crazy, right? Like you wouldn't think that it would work so well, but you're like, holy moly. And yeah, I don't know if you've ever put in like the little trick to make it more stable if you're struggling. I think it's either lemon juice or vinegar or cream of tartar. I
think it's cream of tartar, just like egg whites for a meringue. Also, I wanted to, so you don't have to not go. You could teach them how to make cashew cheese.
I would have to like cashew cheese to do that.
Oh, well, there is that. But you don't. The Miyako's butter thing is amazing. It acts just like butter. I haven't tried all the cheeses. Do you have an opinion of cheeses?
I love regular cheese, and that's part of the problem, that I have a huge, personally, I would rather just not have cheese than eat the non-cheese cheeses. That's just my own personal preference. However, there are lots of people, like I have a cousin who is vegan, and we've all gone through the gamut. If you have these restrictions, you've tried everything else. And their favorites, they like, some of the Miyoko's ones are good. Personally, my feeling on them is some I liked, some I didn't. It honestly is seriously dependent. Sometimes you want it for the stretch factor, and so you're mixing it with so many other things, you're not really going to taste this flavor of cheese. So you can find one and it's fine. It's not a big deal. But yeah, sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. I think a good one for cream cheese can be tough. But I'm in general, I like the tofutti one. It's not like the best, but I didn't like the Miyoko's cream cheese for some reason, but I know a lot of people who do. So
that's the one of those that I've tried, and it was just not right.
Yeah, we're okay. Well, good validation, but no, I mean, everyone, it's a palate thing too, for the replacements that are pre-made to replace like a whole thing like that. Like cheese is very specific and complex, and I can't have yeast. That's a problem for me for cheese. A lot of ways that you can make things taste like cheese is by adding yeast to it, but I can't have that. So that's kind of thing. I will say though, like, to get kind of a creamy, slightly tangy, cheesy situation when you're making like a sauce, for instance, if you're using a milk, like a nut milk or anything, and you add an acid like a lemon specifically, that combo can give you the flavor combo in your mouth that it's reminiscent of like a buttermilk or something that's dairy-fied, or cheese. It's kind of got that tang in there. I've used that successfully for myself before. I haven't really tried it for other people because usually it was just an at-home situation, but I've found that a nut milk, or usually nut milk, like a fatty milk mixed with lemon, can help create that effect of the idea of it. It's not a textural thing at all, but it's definitely a slight flavor, especially for like, like I said, pastas and sauces and things like that. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
There's one more thing. We actually have somebody in our kingdom that is deathly allergic to onions. And so, yeah, so in things that need that onion taste, what we've started using is hing, which is asafoetida.
Yeah,
and it works really well, and they're not allergic to that because it's not an allium.
I have another suggestion as a substitute for alliums. Whenever I'm cooking for someone and I know they have an issue with onions or garlic, savory, the herb savory.
The savory.
Summer or winter? Does it matter?
Actually, my bottle doesn't, the bottle that I have doesn't specify, but I'm pretty sure it's summer.
Because I have seeds for both and I haven't managed to plant them yet. So I don't actually know what either of them tastes like.
You know how allspice tastes like all of those, Christmassy spices?
Mhm.
It's like it tastes like all of those savory spices.
Huh. Thank you for that. That's awesome. I'm going to go
Interesting.
plant those today.
Sorry, just to interrupt, you have just under 15 minutes. There was a question
Okay.
in the chat.
Yeah.
At camping
Okay.
events, do you have hints for grab and go type dishes?
Grabbing what dishes?
Grab and go.
Oh, grab and go dishes. It depends on, it depends on the restriction. But for instance, I love pie, and you can make pie dough. So you can make closed hand pies. You can make them out of rice flour. For the doughs, you can use rice flour, like to make it gluten-free and vegan. Rice flour plus vegetable shortening, or rice flour plus oil and some sort of starch. Like I was saying, like a sorghum flour, or that's more period, but like you can use a little bit of cornstarch if you don't want to get xanthan gum. Or you can just buy the pre-made 1-to-1 flour replacements. And then, it's not quite as 1-to-1 in terms of the ratios. If you want to find a recipe for a gluten-free vegan pie dough, they're pretty simple, but just know in general they're less malleable, like they're less forgiving, they're less flexible. But it's totally feasible to do that. And that can be a thing. You can stuff it with whatever ingredients you want. You can also, like, I don't know if you're doing grab and go like in a pre-made container, or just you want them to be like a hand pie where they're just, the entire meal is in itself portable. Is that what you mean? That's a hand pie thing. You can try to figure out a pie dough recipe that works. And grab and go, obviously, if you can't figure out the hand dough recipe, because it takes a lot of fiddling with to get the texture right. So that's the first thing that's coming to mind in terms of grab and go, where the actual meal itself is portable. If you have containers, then that's totally open to whatever you want. Hummus is great. That's a good protein mix. You can put some hummus with some veg. That's a little modern, that version of that, but there's different kind of dips and things like that you can manage. That's a great question. I don't have a ton of answers for the grab and go on that, but if you can manage to figure out, like I said, the hand pies are usually the go-to for like the grab and go situation. So that's why I'm like, oh yeah, it's coming to my mind. But like I said, the pie dough recipe, you could use like a Bob's 1-to-1 with, I like to use it with very, very cold vegetable shortening. I know some people like coconut oil. It's fine as long as it's really cold. And just, you would kind of, the process is similar, but you just need to add a little more extra liquid, so more water. And then it's a little more delicate. So it's less, like I said, less forgiving. So I would use parchment paper to help you maneuver it, and kind of maybe use the fold in half kind of hand pie instead of the like covered pot pie situation. That's way harder to do. It's less stable. So yeah, tapioca. I prefer, if I'm going to put a starch in to bind it, I like tapioca starch for sweet pies. And I like, or you can use the regular xanthan gum cornstarches for non-sweet pies, but the tapioca is kind of fun because it's naturally lends itself to sweetness. But that's what I recommend for grab and goes, because you can put anything inside, and that can fit any diet inside of a hand pie. So if you can manage the dough, you're good. Any other questions? I'm going to plug in. Sorry, my
I had a
screen's
question.
gonna go. Yeah.
I really like finding actual period recipes that are naturally good for a certain group, like vegan or gluten-free. Have you found any really good recipes along that line in research?
Yeah. So like I was mentioning before about region specific for gluten-free, if you don't have a nut allergy, but rice works too. Rice is not nuts. So for instance, if you work on a region that uses a lot of rice. Obviously, Asian culture regions will use a lot of rice. Middle Eastern ones use a lot of rice, depending on how far back you go, and just kind of different things. Romans use rice, I think, if I recall correctly. But for me personally, I have found I haven't personally delved into the historical region of Asian foods to deal with rice myself, but I'm sure I know that it exists in abundance. So that would be a good place to kind of find some fun stuff there. But personally, I haven't delved there yet. I've done it for modern food, but not for historical food. But for me, I've done Roman, Italian, and Spanish. I find a lot because they use almond milk, they use almond flour, they do have the Lent situation too. So I don't eat red meat really, so I prefer fish or chicken. And so when it's Lent, in those Catholic regions, Italy, Spain, they're also going to have recipes that are fitting for that. So for instance, let me share my screen real quick again. I have one of my favorite YouTubers, because I have a bunch of SCA YouTubers because I'm a nerd. Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's just regular YouTube. So here is my favorite recipe guy. He's amazing. I love the way he sounds. Historical Italian cooking. So he does Roman and Italian medieval cooking. He uses medieval techniques. And I don't know if it's just him, but he's the one that speaks. And they have their own cookbook already and things like this. So this is my favorite place to start. And if you can see, there's already the one that he did 3 days ago, ancient Roman cabbage rolls, vegan, gluten-free, easy peasy side dish. Everyone can eat it, hopefully, except for if you can't have leeks or cabbage. And then also you can see here, there's on the end, ancient.
Alexi, we've lost you there. Are you still talking? Okay, so it seems we've lost our speaker, Alexi. If you can hear us, Alexi, thank you so much. That was very much appreciated. I'm going to stop the recording now because obviously just having this screen on the YouTube won't be much fun for anybody. But yeah, thanks everybody for the input. That was fantastic. I'll stop recording.